On her phone, my number was saved as "Do Not Answer," even though I was her only child, and that discovery cut deeper than the sharp tang of hospital bleach soaking the ICU walls. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the hallway, my sweaty palms gripping her cracked iPhone, which a nurse had handed me along with a bag of her things, a gray coat drenched in cheap, cloying perfume, worn-out boots, and a set of keys that jingled like a funeral knell. The screen lit up with an incoming message, and I saw that name, not a sweetheart, not Alice, not even a dry L, but a categorical, cold command to herself or some invisible observer: "Do not answer." A bitter lump rose in my throat, tasting like the burnt onions that always permeated her kitchen, and I felt the reality I had built for years, the image of a caring daughter saving her aging mother, begin to tear at the seams, exposing the ugly, rotting underside I had suspected existed but was too afraid to admit. Why did the woman for whom I paid the bills, delivered groceries, and booked appointments with the best cardiologists recoil from my calls as if I were a debt collector or a relentless spammer? I unlocked the phone, my fingers trembling traitorously when the passcode worked on the first try. 4 zeros, a primitive defense for a person who spent her life believing she had nothing to hide while lying at every turn. The wallpaper was standard, factory default, as if the device had no owner, but the call log was a sea of read missed calls from me, dozens, hundreds over the last month, and not a single one answered, even though she always called me back from the landline complaining that her cell service was spotty. I scrolled down the history, feeling a clammy chill crawl down my spine, and stumbled upon a message thread with a contact named David. My husband. My David, who swore he couldn't stand his mother-in-law and spoke to her only for my sake, looked completely different in this chat. Their dialogue was full of emojis, understanding, and a sickening, conspiratorial coziness that made my stomach turn. "Is she having a fit again?" my mother wrote. "Yeah, Eleanor, I'm at my wit's end. You know she's having a spring episode." "I'm trying to be gentle," my husband replied, and the timestamp was from yesterday, when I was crying in the bathroom from exhaustion while he said he was going to take out the trash. In that moment, I should have thrown the phone against the wall, made a scene, barged into the ward where she lay hooked up to N4 after a fake heart attack, and demanded the truth, but instead, I froze, turning into a statue of ice. Years of living with Eleanor had taught me one thing: any emotion is a weapon she will catch mid-flight and plunge right back into your heart. So I took a deep breath, inhaling the air that smelled of medicine and other people's misery, and carefully slid the phone into my purse pocket. I decided to play by her rules, to become that very "do not answer," an invisible woman, an observer, a spy in my own personal hell, to understand just how deep the roots of this betrayal went. Walking out of the hospital, I caught my reflection in the glass doors, a pale 32-year-old woman with dark circles under her eyes and slumped shoulders, looking like the perfect victim. But inside me, a tiny, angry spark was already igniting, whispering that this time, I wouldn't let them paint me as the crazy one. The drive home took 40 minutes, and every second I replayed the last few months in my head, trying to pinpoint the moment my family turned into a theater of the absurd directed by the woman currently lying in cardiology. I remembered how David started staying late at work, how money vanished from our joint account for car repairs, he'd said, but now I realized those sums could have been flowing in a completely different direction. Entering the apartment, I heard David talking on the phone in the kitchen, his voice low, ingratiating, a tone he hadn't used with me in ages. I took off my boots silently, careful not to jingle my keys, and crept down the hallway, feeling like a thief in my own home. The floorboards we never got around to replacing creaked traitorously, and the voice in the kitchen instantly cut off. David walked out to meet me with a plastered-on smile, his eyes reading wariness mixed with poorly concealed irritation, and asked, "So, how is she?" without even trying to hug me. "Stable," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though everything inside me boiled with the urge to smash his face with the very phone lying in my bag. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself some water, noticing crumbs on the table from cookies only Mom liked, oatmeal raisin, the ones I bought her by the carton because she supposedly had no money for sweets. David, I said without turning around, watching the water tremble in the glass, Mom asked me to tell you she needs to pay for a caregiver, but her card is blocked. Could you transfer me some money? It was a lie, a test, a shot in the dark, and I felt his back stiffen. Alice, you know things are tight right now, he began his usual song and dance. I told you, my bonus got delayed. Maybe you can borrow from someone? I turned slowly and looked him straight in the eyes. There wasn't a drop of sympathy, only cold calculation and the fear of exposure. I realized he had the money, it just wasn't meant for me. That evening, when David fell asleep, turning to the wall and demonstratively pulling the blanket up to his ears, I took out Mom's phone and went into the bathroom, locking the door and turning on the faucet to create white noise. Sitting on the edge of the cold tub, I began to methodically study the contents of her digital life, feeling like an archaeologist excavating an ancient tomb filled with poisons and curses. In the Notes app, I found a file titled The Plan, and my heart skipped a beat. There, in a neat list, were the steps. 1. Complaints about Alice to the doctor, done. 2. Talk to David about her instability, done. 3. Drafting power of attorney for the apartment, in progress. I reread the lines, the letters swimming before my eyes and turning into black worms. My mother, to whom I had dedicated my life, was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to sell my apartment, the one I inherited from my grandmother, and judging by everything, David was in on it. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to double over, gasping for the humid air scented with my shampoo, the only thing that still seemed normal in this madness. The next 2 days passed in a fog. I went to work, mechanically shuffled papers, smiled at colleagues, while inside me a black hole grew, devouring every warm memory of childhood. I remembered being 5 years old, Mom forgetting to pick me up from kindergarten, sitting on the porch until dark when the security guard called the cops, and then her crying and screaming that it was my fault because I hadn't reminded her that morning. Back then, I believed her, took the blame, and that pattern repeated for 30 years. Mom made mistakes, Mom betrayed, but it was always Alice's fault for not loving enough, not trying enough, not enduring enough. Now, looking at colleagues discussing weekend plans, I felt like an alien, a creature from another planet where love is measured in square footage and trust is sold for the privilege of not hearing insults. I knew I had to act, but fear paralyzed me. If I made a mistake, they would destroy me, lock me in a clinic, take everything, and no one would believe the hysterical woman on whom they already had a file. On Thursday, I went back to the hospital, armed with a voice recorder hidden in my coat sleeve and a new mask of the submissive daughter ready to do anything for her mommy's recovery. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows like an exiled queen, her face pink and healthy, her eyes gleaming with a predatory shine when she saw me. "Allie, finally," she rasped, extending a hand with thin, grasping fingers. "I thought you left me here to die. The nurses said you didn't even call." I clenched my fists in my pockets until my nails dug into my palms, but kept my face a mask of guilty submission. "Mom, I was working to pay for your meds," I said quietly, stepping closer. "By the way, the doctor said you need to avoid stress, so I decided not to tell you about the problems with David yet." It was a hook, a lure thrown into murky water, and she swallowed it instantly, her eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring predatorily. "What about David?" she asked too quickly, too interested. "Is he hurting you? Poor boy, it's so hard for him with your temper." "He wants a divorce," I lied without blinking, watching her reaction closely, catching every micro-movement of her facial muscles. "He says he found another woman, a rich one, and is going to leave her, leaving us with nothing." My mother's face distorted with fear for a second, not for me, but for her plan. which was crumbling before her eyes. If David left, she'd lose her ally. "Don't make things up," she barked, forgetting the role of the invalid. "David is a saint, you're the one who drove him to it. He called me yesterday saying he loves you, you're just unbearable." I froze. "He called?" I asked, feeling the puzzle snap together. "But your battery was dead. You told the nurse yourself you couldn't turn it on." She faltered, realizing she'd said too much, her eyes darting around for an exit, and in that moment I saw the real her, not a mother, but a spider entangled in her own web. Returning home, I found David packing a suitcase, not for leaving, but for a business trip he had suddenly remembered half an hour ago. "Urgent call, site in Denver, I'll be back in 3 days, he threw out without looking me in the eye, and I realized my mother had managed to warn him that I suspected something. I stood in the bedroom doorway, watching him neatly fold the very shirts I ironed for him in the mornings, feeling a strange calm, as if watching a boring movie whose ending I already knew. "David," I said in an even voice, "why are you going to Denver with your passport?" He froze, his hand holding socks hovering over the suitcase, his back tensing like a wire. "Were you digging through my stuff?" he hissed, slowly turning around, his face a mask of hatred, the very one he had hidden for years. "No, it's just lying on the nightstand," I nodded, "right next to the tickets to Cancun for two. For David Walker and Eleanor Robinson." It was a bluff, pure improvisation based on intuition and that chat where links to hotels in Mexico flickered, but his reaction confirmed everything. He paled, then flushed, his hands shaking. "You're sick," he exhaled. "Your mother is right, you need treatment. We just wanted to rest, she's out of the hospital, and I'm tired of your hysterics." I laughed, and the sound frightened even me. It was dry, barking, like a cough. "Rest?" I asked. "On the money you siphoned from my account by forging my signature?" "I was at the bank today, David. They have cameras. And they have footage of your visits with a power of attorney I never signed." Silence hung in the room, heavy as a tombstone. I heard the clock ticking on the wall, counting down the seconds to the explosion, and saw the fear in his eyes shift to the feral rage of a cornered rat. He took a step toward me, fists clenched, and for the first time in my life, I was physically afraid of him, not as a husband, but as a strange, dangerous man. "You won't prove anything," he growled, looming over me. "You're nobody. You have no money, no connections, and we have a psychiatrist's report saying you're unstable. Mom arranged it. They'll lock you up, Alice, and you'll rot in the loony bin while we sip cocktails by the ocean." I stepped back into the hallway, feeling the cold wall against my back, my hand finding the pepper spray in my pocket that I'd bought a year ago for stray dogs. "Get out," I said quietly but firmly. "Get out right now, or I'm calling the police. The fraud report is already written, it's with my lawyer along with the audio recordings of your conversations with Mom." It was another half-truth, but it cracked like a whip. He stopped, weighing the risks, and I saw cowardice defeat rage. David left 10 minutes later, slamming the door so hard plaster dusted down from the ceiling, taking his suitcase and leaving behind the scent of the expensive cologne I had given him for our anniversary. I locked the door with every bolt, put on the chain, and slid down the wall to the floor, feeling the adrenaline leave my body, replaced by emptiness and tremors. I was alone in an empty apartment they wanted to steal, without a husband, without a mother, with a nearly empty bank account, but for the first time in years, I felt I was breathing my own air. I pulled out my mother's phone, which had been my star witness all this time, and saw a new message from a contact saved as, "Notary fake, Eleanor, the documents are ready, expecting you tomorrow at 10 a.m. to sign the deed of gift." I smirked, wiping angry tears with my sleeve. Tomorrow morning promised to be interesting, because the person showing up wouldn't be a submissive victim, but a daughter who had finally learned to do not answer evil with good. The night passed without sleep. I sat in the kitchen drinking strong tea and mapping out their scam on the back of electric bills, connecting dates, sums, and lies with arrows. By morning, a battle map lay before me, where every enemy move was predictable and stupid in its greed. I realized they were counting on my emotionality, on me breaking under the weight of betrayal and making mistakes, but they forgot I was my mother's daughter. I, too, know how to be cold when backed into a corner. At 8 in the morning, I called an old friend, a lawyer I went to university with, and asked to meet. His voice was sleepy, but upon hearing the details, he woke up instantly and said just one word, "Come." The notary's office smelled of expensive leather and the dust of century-old archives. I sat in the reception area, hidden behind a ficus plant, waiting for the lead actress to appear. Eleanor walked in at exactly 10, leaning on a cane she never used at home, dressed entirely in black like a mourning widow, though no one had died. David scurried behind her carrying her bag, looking rumpled and nervous. They were whispering, and I caught a fragment of a sentence, "Sign quickly and then to the airport." I let them enter the office, waited 3 minutes for the show to begin, and pushed open the heavy oak door, walking in with a smile that made both their faces drop. "Good morning, family," I said loudly, cutting over the notary's monotone voice. "It seems you forgot to invite the main party to the transaction." My mother jumped up from her chair with an agility uncharacteristic of the dying, her face blotchy and red, the cane clattering to the parquet floor. "What are you doing here?" she shrieked, losing all her aristocratic veneer. "Get out. This is a private meeting." I walked to the desk and placed the printout of bank transactions and a flash drive with the recordings in front of the notary. "This is evidence of grand larceny and conspiracy to commit fraud," I enunciated the legal phrasing, feeling the words fill with the weight of lead. "As well as a police report that will be filed in 1 hour if these two do not sign a waiver of all claims to my apartment and return the money." The notary, an elderly man in glasses, adjusted his frames and looked at my relatives over the rim with disgusted interest, as if looking at cockroaches. "You wouldn't dare," David hissed, but there was no power in his voice, only panic. "We're your family. You'd put your own mother in jail?" I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and saw in her eyes not remorse, but pure, cloudless hatred. She didn't regret what she did, she regretted getting caught. "I don't have a family," I answered, and in that moment something snapped inside, the last thread connecting me to the past. "I only have a contact named Do Not Answer in my phone. And you know what? I won't answer anymore. Not to calls, not to requests, not to blackmail." I slid the papers my lawyer friend had prepared toward them. "Sign. Or I call the detective right now." They signed. Silently, with shaking hands, under the heavy gaze of the notary and my icy calm. Eleanor tried to fake a heart attack, but I simply poured her some water and said the ambulance would arrive with the police, after which she was miraculously healed. When all the formalities were settled, I took the documents and walked out onto the street, leaving them in the stuffy office to deal with each other, spiders in a jar, deprived of prey, soon to start eating themselves. The sun blinded my eyes, the spring wind tousled my hair, and for the first time in many years, I inhaled fully, feeling no weight of guilt on my shoulders. The epilogue to this story happened 7 months later. I sold that apartment, the walls remembered too much, and bought a small studio in a different neighborhood, overlooking a park, containing not a single item from my past life. I changed my phone number, my job, and my hairstyle, cutting off the long hair David liked so much. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that David drank himself into a stupor and lives with his parents, and Eleanor actually got sick, but now, when she calls everyone complaining about her traitorous daughter, no one believes her, because people aren't fools, they can smell the fake. One evening, as I was returning from a run, my new phone, the number of which only 3 people knew, rang. An unfamiliar landline number flashed on the screen. I knew who it was. The intuition developed over years of living on a minefield didn't fail. I stared at the screen, imagining her sitting in her dark apartment, surrounded by old things and malice, dialing numbers at random or from old databases, trying to find even a single crack in my defense. My finger hovered over the green button, just one movement, and I would hear that voice again, crying, accusing, begging. But I remembered the name "Do Not Answer" on her old iPhone. It was the best advice she had ever given me. I pressed block and went to make coffee, whistling a tune I had composed myself, the anthem of my freedom. The silence in the apartment wasn't empty, it was full of me.